Over the last 20 years, the same advances in technology that have powered the smartphone revolution have also powered changes in the satellite industry. For years, companies relied on truck-sized satellites that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. But today, those same satellites can be made orders of magnitude smaller and cheaper. There are satellites orbiting the Earth now that are literally no bigger than a bread box, for those of you who actually know what a bread box is. There are billions of dollars of investment capital being poured into satellites, and that's because they can do lots of useful things. Governments can use them to image natural disasters in order to aid in emergency response. Hedge fund investors can use them to do things like counting cars in parking lots to see what stores are hot this season, or looking at whether oil tankers are moving in and out of refineries to guess oil prices. Law enforcement is even using satellites to track down pirates on the high seas. But this increase in demand for satellites is also driving an increase in demand for rocket launches. After all, the satellites have to get up to space somehow, and we've really only figured out one way to do it. So companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab have been increasing the number of launches they've been doing every year. And with those increases in launches also comes an increase in pollution. That's because rocket fuels are typically composed of things like methane or kerosene, which produce lots of greenhouse gases. But there are companies looking to improve this process, either by making rocket engines more efficient so that they use less fuel, or by changing the fuels entirely so that they produce less carbon emissions. To understand more about the impact of spaceflight on climate change, we talked to experts in aerospace engineering to learn more about the impact of rockets on climate.
We've been transitioning in the last 10 years away from these kind of giant monolithic spacecraft, one per rocket and a really big rocket to get it out there with government funding, to more of a model of private launch, where we have a number of companies that are really kind of competing in the classic capitalist style to try to get a piece of the pie with respect to launching payloads into space.
The propellants, which normally include a fuel and an oxidizer, combine and combust, and then those combustion products are forced out the end of the rocket nozzle to provide thrust and propel the rocket into space.
No matter what the propellant is, the way that you push a rocket off the launch pad and up into the high-speed orbit or escape trajectory that it needs to get away from Earth, you have to push really fast mass out the back of the rocket. And most of it contains some byproducts that contribute to global climate change.
One of the most common fuel combinations is what we call RP1, which stands for rocket propellant 1, which essentially is a high-grade kerosene. Newer rockets are going to methane as a fuel, or liquid natural gas. Liquid natural gas is much cleaner burning. Essentially, you don't have any carbon particles or soot. You still get a little bit of CO2, but it's less than if you're burning kerosene.
A 2018 report from the Aerospace Corporation found that rocket emissions uniquely impact the stratosphere and could potentially affect the ozone layer, although more study is needed. The report recommends that launch companies and scientists do more to understand these impacts before launches get too numerous. There are a lot of companies in the spaceflight industry working to reduce the impact of rockets on the climate. After all, a lot of rocket scientists were inspired by Star Trek, which is maybe the ultimate in a clean energy future. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin rocket that he used to send William Shatner into space, for example, burned hydrogen and oxygen to output water. There are companies doing other radical sci-fi solutions like Spin Launch, which is building a giant centrifuge in the desert to literally fling satellites into space. Today we're going to be talking with main base Blue Shift Aerospace. Its solution is literally more down to earth, using the power of Mother Nature to make a more sustainable, more efficient rocket fuel.
I was born in the early 70s during the Apollo era, and that really set my expectations for what the future would look like and how humanity would be exploring space. Those expectations weren't met for me, and so I ultimately pursued a degree in physics and then later in electrical engineering, but my curiosity for the universe and exploration was always there. And I always wanted to find a way to combine technology and benefiting our planet and humanity. And it wasn't until 2012 that I decided that the time was ripe for a new space company. And I wanted to be the next launch company, and I wanted to do it in a green fashion, in a more Earth-responsible fashion. So here we are, over 240 engine tests later. We've now launched a small prototype version of our green fuel-powered rocket here in Maine, and we're about a year away from launching all the way to space with a commercial payload using a cleaner, nearly carbon-neutral fuel for the first time in the world. Our rocket technology is a hybrid rocket, which means the fuel is a solid and the oxidizer, in this case, is a liquid. The fuel is, we believe, close to carbon neutral. Because of the principal ingredient, if I could reveal the principal ingredient, which I can't, you would understand that inherently in the creation of the fundamental ingredient, we're capturing a lot of carbon. There's both complexity and advantages to doing a hybrid rocket engine. The benefit is we actually have half the complexity of traditional rocket engines. We also have the advantage that our fuel is inherently very stable. It is non-explosive. It is safer and less complex than traditional liquid fuel rockets, but there's been far less research done around them over the years. And so we decided to start doing a whole series of engine tests using different mixtures and different blends of biofuels. All of them non-toxic, all of them extremely stable, and all of them non-explosive. For the suborbital rocket, we will shoot for 100% reusability. And then for orbital, our plans are to at least recover the first stage, maybe the second stage. It's a very important part of, well, the financial plan is to make them as reusable as possible. So when we launched the rocket on January of this year, it was an incredible experience. I think we were all sort of impressed by how very little exhaust you could see. This is great. Wow, that sound, I love that sound. This is incredible. What I was surprised by was that this small company in Maine that launched a rocket using a bio-derived fuel changed the conversation in about a month after our launch. And since then, I've seen other companies being asked, how are you going to make your launches more renewable? How are you going to make it more Earth-friendly? And I think the heat needs to stay on all of us, including our company, and how we can be more sustainable.
Space may be the final frontier for business, but Earth is still the only planet that we can live on. But thanks to companies like Blue Shift Aerospace, we may still be able to reach for the stars without heating up the sky.
The mortgage business is a very old business. It's not something that like young people get into. So for me, when I looked at this business, I thought a lot about, hey, what is the actual execution model that we need to have in order to build a long-term business in a way that is very sustainable? I'm Andrew Wang. I'm the CEO of Valin Technologies, and I am 29 years old. Valin is a mortgage servicing technology company. We're trying to champion homeowners and make sure that they have a trusted brand that they can work with. It's a very complicated process today, and what we're trying to do is simplify it. I actually came from the investment side of the world, so I was looking for a company that I could work with and I felt really treated borrowers the right way, as well as treated me as a client of theirs the right way. Because today the way it works is that a mortgage portfolio owner actually has to go contract with a mortgage servicing company in order to get their mortgages serviced. So what ended up happening is as I looked at these companies more and more, I realized that none of them actually cared about the underlying consumers, which really got me first looking to find a company to invest in, but I couldn't find anyone who really wanted to take this mission and this endeavor, which is why I decided to build this company. It's actually a very difficult space in general to get started in terms of a business because it's highly, highly regulated. There were two large phases of difficulties that we ran into. The first phase was actually convincing investors that this was a doable thing because you have to do a lot of R&D, you have to understand all these regulations, and regulations in this space specifically is across 50 states. So you have to understand the laws of 50 states as well as the federal regulations as well as what's called agency regulations. Part two of it was actually getting business from enterprises, right? Because again, it's a really regulated space. Usually they'll say, hey, why don't you just work with so-and-so large company? At least they are someone who's been around in the space. So getting past that and getting to a place where we now are able to service large quantums of mortgages as well as work with multiple institutional partners, that took a lot of convincing, a lot of really getting people to buy into the concept and the long-term viability of the solution.
BioTech was one of the most professional, long-lasting, and dangerous cybercriminal operations ever seen. It started off life in 2014 when it was stealing people's banking information. Later on, it developed into a kind of free-for-all where cybercriminals of all different kinds would use it to install other malware, such as ransomware or remote control tools. But then earlier this year, it all came crashing down when an international cyber police operation pulled the plug on BioTech. In the Ukraine, they even managed to find an individual they believed to be running the operation. So how did BioTech get so huge, and what can we learn from its rise and fall? BioTech started off life as your standard kind of banking malware. It would be sent in emails with malicious attachments. Once you open the malicious attachment, it would download onto your computer. From there, when you started using a banking website, for instance, it would steal your login information. But as with a lot of cybercriminal operations, it had to grow. So instead of just doing the banking login information theft, it would also offer up its services to other cybercriminals. So you could buy access to BioTech. And then on every single one of those infected machines, you could try and run your own malware. So that would be something like ransomware, where your computer gets locked up and you have to pay a certain amount of money for it to be unlocked, or it could be something called a remote access Trojan, which is essentially just complete control over your PC.
They had absolutely no dependencies on any external resources. Everything that they needed for their operation, they got by themselves and through their own network. So really a pretty complex operation, making it super difficult for us, the defenders, to keep track of everything that's going on and try and provide protections.
BioTech had a really broad range of victims, whether that was individuals, government departments, or large private organizations. In the case of Frankfurt, which is one of the biggest and busiest financial hubs in the world, the local government department had to shut down its entire IT network as a result of an BioTech infection. And that kind of thing can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars just to recover from. And down in North Carolina, a school district there had to do the same thing, and again, reportedly costs up to $300,000. According to the Ukrainian police, the global damages caused by BioTech were up to $2 billion.
The entire cybersecurity community and all the security vendors are really well aware of this kind of threats, and they are trying their best, we included, to track them down one by one, to understand all their activity and provide some solutions that can be, used by companies.
It took 2 years for police to come together and take down BioTech. During that time, they had spent hours and hours sifting through all the data that they had in order to essentially map out the BioTech network. That helped them zero down on which servers were the ones that were really key to running the whole operation. They had actually managed to create an accurate map of BioTech and a kind of model of it, essentially, that they could then test their hacking tools out and then hack into the system itself and then take it down. So once they'd practiced on the model, they could do it on the real thing, which is exactly what they did in late January when Europol brought the Dutch police, the German police, and Ukrainian police all together in a day of action that would see the demise of BioTech. Whilst they were hacking into the server and shutting it down, in Ukraine, they were raiding the house of an IT professional who is believed to be one of the key administrators of BioTech.
The chances that we will see that again are unfortunately very high. The thing is, that cybercrime, it's an economic ecosystem. People are doing that for business, not for fun. And so if one product is off the shelf, you can rest assured that another product will take its place very quickly. And even today, we already see some of the other competitors trying to take Emotet's place and definitely getting bigger. It's definitely not the end of botnets. It's just a minor bump for cybercrime. Give it enough time and it will jump back up, whether it will be Emotet or anyone else. If you ask me what's the best method of protection, just be aware. Make sure you know which emails you open and if it's a valid email or if you know the sender. And if you don't, try your best not to click any links and be very, very cautious about it. If you manage to practice that correctly, you will be 99% protected against threats like Emotet.
Dr. Katalin Kariko is a Hungarian-born biochemist whose research is responsible for the mRNA vaccines that are in many of our arms protecting us against COVID. Dr. Kariko got her PhD in Hungary, and she immigrated to the United States in 1985 with her husband and her young daughter. There were rules about how much money you could come over with at the time, so she stuffed the equivalent of about $1,200 in her daughter's teddy bear before coming here. So came here with very little, got a job at the University of Pennsylvania. In about 1990, she was working on this research about something called mRNA.
A traditional vaccine takes a dead virus or piece of that virus and introduces it to your body in order to train your immune system to fight it. But an mRNA vaccine does something unique. Rather than giving you a piece of the virus, it instead gives you a program or message to your body. And your cells themselves make a piece of that virus. And that piece of virus trains your immune system to fight the whole virus. What makes this more impressive is that because all you need is the genetic code of a virus, you can actually produce vaccines much more quickly than you can using traditional methods.
It's cutting edge science. It's never been used in a widespread vaccine like this before. And Dr. Kariko saw the potential in mRNA science back in 1990. She studied it at Penn for years, 5 years in fact, until in 1995 she got demoted. In effect, she was ahead of her time, almost too far ahead, because she kept applying for grants and the answer kept coming back no. She had no money, she had no backing. So she was demoted and sent back to a lower level of the scientific academy. She wasn't fired, so it allowed her to keep doing the work, but it was a huge step back in the trajectory of her career. So her husband was back in Hungary at this point dealing with the visa issue, and she was diagnosed with cancer. No one would fault her for giving up. It would be enough to topple anyone between the demotion and getting ill yourself. She knew there was potential, but her bosses did not. But there was always one person who believed in her, and she has actually said that really all it takes is one. If you have one person who buys into your idea and can fund you and give you enough money to live on, your career can survive, and that's effectively what happened to her. Drew Weissman is her longtime collaborator at Penn. She really tried to get funding all through the 90s, and she said, every night I was working, grant, grant, grant. And it always came back, no, no, no. She has heard no so many times. And the fact that she persisted until she was successful, until we now all, or those of us who've gotten vaccinated, have this science in our bloodstreams, that is why she is on the 50 over 50. A lot of the stories on this list are stories of triumph, are stories of persistence, continuing to work even when the world is telling you stop. And she didn't just do it for her, she did it for humankind.
It was difficult because the people did not believe that messenger RNA can be a therapy, and together with my colleague Drew Weissman at the University of Pennsylvania, we developed this method where we changed one component in the RNA, which made it less immunogenic, and it is possible to use it for different kind of therapy. And also it turned out that it is better for vaccine.
These vaccines are able to be scaled up quickly. They have proven to be highly effective, even against viral mutations, and they are incredibly safe, even by the standards of vaccines, which are themselves very safe compared to other drugs.
By refining the research, by refining the science, they figured out a way to make it safe. And that is why the technology was finally at a point that it was so promising when COVID became a pandemic, and it became clear that mRNA science would underpin the most successful vaccine.
Patents that she shares with Dr. Drew Weissman are licensed to both BioNTech and Moderna for their mRNA vaccines. Her discoveries, which help these vaccines deliver their potent immune boosts, were originally developed for cancer vaccines and continue to be applied to research in that area. mRNA technology behind the vaccines is also being developed against other diseases, such as the flu and even heart disease.
Really, we will celebrate when this human suffering is over, when the hardship and all of this terrible time will end, and hopefully in the summer, when we will forget about virus and vaccine, then I will be really celebrating.
Every story about these vaccines, there's a reference to her. One of the heroes, the unsung hero. You see the term again, again, and again. She is finally getting credit.
So how I have learned about IFF is kind of a funny story, because I was working for 25 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and then somebody reached out to me whether I want to be an independent director on IFF board. But I had no idea what this company is. I had not even an idea what the industry is. But then I learned so much, and it convinced me that this is a real fun industry. An industry where you get art and science combined. And that's really, really something which attracted me to be on the board of IFF and then later become CEO and chairman.
IFF may not be a company you've heard of, but you've almost certainly used one of their clients' products. We went to their headquarters in New York City to see just exactly how these products are made, and it was pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, oh yeah. Look, we just do 20% of our business in the US and the rest is international. So we have basically most of our employees somewhere. Asia, probably 20-25%, Europe, probably 30%, 35%, and then Latin America and North America. Look, if you ask me how you get exposed to some of the IFF technologies or products, and you go into a supermarket or in a duty-free shop, I would guess in 1 of 5 or 1 of 6 products, there's certainly an IFF technology. It could be a plant-based burger, which is entirely made of IFF ingredients and technologies. It could be a fragrance you wear, which is a complete IFF creation, where we have invented the molecules, where we have done the creation with our perfumers, and we have manufactured it. So all of that could be exposed to you as a consumer.
Andrew Sibig was running Bayer's $12 billion pharmaceutical business for a really long time. He's taken that kind of pharma CEO energy to IFF, engineered a bunch of really big mergers, including a $26 billion merger with DuPont's nutrition business, which is why now IFF has one of the clearest and strongest platforms to be developing plant-based protein.
We think just broader than flavors and fragrances. We think about total solutions. We think about innovative and very creative spaces to go, like the whole plant-based meat space, where we believe it's good for sustainability, it's good for health. We wanted to be a player there. And they have a couple of other areas, in particular in the biotech field, which were very, very attractive for IFF. So what we have here is a robot, which is basically mixing all these creations to make sure that our customers get the first tests already. Yeah, this is a robot which is doing it all on its own, so you don't need any people. You just put the formula in and it's mixing it automatically. The most fun for me is basically talking to our researchers, talking to our creators about new products. What can we do? What can we invent? And what can we bring to our customers and to the consumers? That's a big fun part. And I can tell you, we have a lot of very, very creative and very knowledgeable employees. And I think we have a very good atmosphere in the company as well. There are a lot of formulas and a lot of things which we test out with consumers and with our customers as well. Here everything is data and facts. And I would say that's something which is very important to me as well. And that might be important about IFF is that we are a company where research and development plays an important role. So we have always a very data-driven approach. The whole aspect of sustainability or ESG is much, much more important these days. And I'm so happy that we started already 7 or 8 years ago to put a real focus behind that. For IFF, it's pretty obvious. We have brought the company from around about 2.9 billion in sales to 11.5 billion in sales. And certainly the market cap has increased quite significantly as well. With that, a lot of changes have happened in the company, but I believe for the better, because the company is now very well positioned to be very successful for the next decade, because we have literally all the ingredients to be successful.
You're at home and the phone rings, and on the other end of the line is someone claiming to be a police officer. They tell you that a loved one, say your grandson, has been involved in some kind of crime and they need some money immediately to bail them out. They then give you directions on how to send that money. Sounds suspicious? Well, it should, because it's a conceit in a growing type of crime, typically targeting the elderly. Perpetrators can earn as much as $1 million or more by upping the game and targeting as many people as possible. So how are the perpetrators getting away with it, and how significant is this kind of crime? The Grandparent scam is a take on an old kind of crime, really, where you pretend to be someone you're not and trick whatever target you've got into handing over money. In this case, it's the elderly who are typically targeted, most likely because they're more trusting. The fraudster will pretend to be either a police officer, a lawyer, maybe even the family member themselves, and say that they're in some kind of trouble, whether that's financial or legal, or maybe they've suffered some kind of horrific accident. Then they say they need a specific amount of money to cover whatever costs. This can be anything from a few $100s to $10,000, maybe more. And they're able to accrue hundreds of thousands, maybe even $1 million or more, simply by pretending. It's an old school scam.
They're much more prevalent than what's being reported. There's a lot of embarrassment, shame associated with that. So I think a lot of, especially the elderly, don't want to report that they've been scammed, because then people question, well, maybe your cognition is going down, maybe they take over your finances, those sort of things would be going on with that. Here in New Jersey, we had a total complaint last year of 485 cases. And then you're talking about a dollar amount of about $11.5 million was scammed out of the elderly. So it's pretty significant.
In one of the more recent examples of this kind of fraud, the alleged perpetrators were carrying out what turned out to be a fairly sophisticated and large and complex version of this crime. Instead of using online payments, they would convince the elderly victim, they were around 70 in this case, to send parcels of money rather than sending money over the internet. This turned out to be a pretty successful gambit for them, in that they earned as much as $1.5 million in total, according to the Justice Department. The average cybercriminal operation, they'll use tricks like phishing emails, where they'll try and get your logins for certain websites, or install malware on your computer or smartphone even. This kind of crime is really more old school. The cyber aspect of the cases that I've seen anyway are really to do with the organization of the crime. So they will use an encrypted communications app or something like Telegram to organize how they carry out the operation. In one case I saw Instagram was used as a way of recruiting people to take part. And then, of course, there's the money aspect. So once they've obtained the money, the fraudsters will typically need to find a way to launder it. So they'll use online services, whether that's cryptocurrency service, or just in a classic way by tumbling the money through different online accounts. The sad thing about this kind of crime is that it's almost primarily targeting elderly people in their retirement savings. And obviously during a pandemic year, there's an atmosphere of fear around, and cyber criminals have been preying on that in numerous ways. And one of those ways, sadly, has been targeting of elderly victims.
The criminals are really tugging at those heartstrings, really driving in that speed. It has to be done right away. The faster things go, you can let things get out of control. Momentum starts to take over. Slow it down. Ask for verification from family members. See what's going on. Before you do anything, call the parents. Maybe call somebody else in the family to see what's going on. That usually can clear things up. Understand that it's not really the course of action typically that's being taken. Is nobody's going to call you saying that they need money to get somebody out of jail. That's not the course of action. And the other thing is, they'll pretend to be either that grandchild or that niece. Try to ask a question that only that child or that niece or nephew, whoever it is, only that they would know. And if they can give you that answer, maybe you can verify it that way. Talk to somebody before you send any of that money.
My philosophy of running a company and solving a big problem is that we need to be understanding what they're going through. What's the user experience every single day? My name's Steve Wen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Dre Alliance. We are DoorDash for shipping containers. We have a network of drivers who drive their own trucks to deliver shipping containers on behalf of large retailers. Before starting this company, I grew up as an immigrant to the United States with my family. My parents actually started a warehouse in LA. So I grew up in a warehouse helping out the family, registering truckers in and out of the warehouse. So I knew this industry was outdated. After college, after starting a few of my own companies, I realized nothing had changed. The same thing is still happening in this industry. So what I did was I started my own drayage trucking company first. Spent 2 years running that, dispatching my own trucks. And then after 2 years, I realized we're ready to make a move to start a tech company in this space and help these drivers to deliver container more efficiently. I think the key advantage of not having a traditional technical founder type of background is that I can relate to these folks that are working in this field. And this is why I spent 2 years actually running a trucking company myself. I didn't graduate from Stanford, I didn't graduate from Harvard. I didn't know anyone in tech. So it was a lot of networking and getting to know people who barely know tech, and then finally getting into some investors who are more familiar with the space. So there's a lot of things that forces out to go upstream against. But it's just grit, not giving up. I knew this is a problem. I knew we have the right solution, so I just kept going at it.
I don't really define success. It's not sort of a word that preoccupies me. When you define success, you might be completely undershooting your potential, right? That's the danger when you think of the world in that way. Whereas we're always looking at, how deep can we reach? How high can we aim given what we have to work with here? So that's really our mindset towards everything. I am Frank Slootman. I am the chairman and CEO of Snowflake. We're a newer generation of software companies. We are enabling massively scaled, very, very high performance analytical data processes. This day and age, business processes are end-to-end digital, and data becomes the beating heart of their enterprises, and Snowflake is what enables that. Things are going to change dramatically in the world of data. I mean, historically, data has been used for reporting, it's been used for populating dashboards. Where we're moving now is that where data is literally driving digital operations, and with the requirements that come with that in terms of what the platforms have to be capable of, things like machine learning and AI, it's very different. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding around IPOs that it's some kind of biblical event that sort of changes the world. And from where I'm sitting, having done this, a number of times, it's a blip on the radar. It comes in, it goes. It's a mile marker during a marathon. It's not nearly as consequential as people think, and we're not mesmerized by it. We're not obsessed with it. It comes in, it goes. And by the way, the process of taking companies public is not that hard if you have a good company, by the way. In the case of Snowflake, it was incredibly easy because the demand, outstripped the supply by orders of magnitude. When I was a kid, there were a few years where I wasn't having very good grades, and I remember my dad telling me, I don't really care what your grades are as long as you're putting everything into it that you have, and then, we will accept whatever that is. What that means is I'm very much focused on the inputs, not on the outcomes. My worry is that, when I join a company like Snowflake, I'm being handed a promise, a potential. Right? And my role in the company is to deliver on that potential to the absolute fullest. And we live in perpetual fear and anxiety that we are not fully delivering on the potential that we are handed. I have empathy with a lot of quarterbacks that don't know how to retire because you know what it feels like to be in those very, very tense, highly charged situations and being able to prevail. And you can never reproduce that when you leave the field. You just can't. You'll never be better than when you're under the gun and when the demands are very, very great and the problems are difficult and complex, right? One of the things you notice when you're in so-called retirement, you start to atrophy, pretty quickly. Not in a very obvious way, but you're just feeling the edge. Starts to become dull. People like me don't like that. We are feeling our best when we're being our best, and the only way to be your best is to subject yourself to the most demanding set of circumstances. Being in the arena is sort of a natural habitat, for me. It makes me feel like, I am going to be the sharpest I'll ever be.
The advent of inventions like the automobile and airplane fueled the transportation revolution that also helped to mechanize agriculture in the early 1900s. Then in the 1950s and 60s, the so-called Green Revolution led to the development of chemicals like fertilizers and pesticides, which helped increase yields of crops. Now, both of these revolutions helped diminish hunger and feed a growing global population, but they also came at a cost. Fertilizers and chemicals ran off into the water supply, creating pollution, disrupting ecosystems, and harming the fish that people were trying to eat. The emissions from tractors and all the machines that help farming be more efficient contributed to climate change, and this was only exacerbated in the last few decades as the production of meat has become more and more industrialized. But fortunately, there are also companies, startups, and entrepreneurs who are working to solve problems that allow us to produce more food while reducing or even reversing the harms we're causing to the environment. To better understand the impact that agriculture has on climate change, we talked to two academic researchers who've been studying how farming impacts the environment.
I think it is surprising to people that the food system overall is about a quarter of all emissions of greenhouse gases in the world.
There's no way to sustain 8 billion people on this planet without doing some form of agriculture to produce food. But it's also pushing our environment to its limits.
So I think my first question would have to be, what are the different agricultural practices right now that are main drivers of climate change?
I think for agriculture, there are really three main ways that it affects climate change right now. One is the loss of forests around the world. Two is the methane that's produced primarily from animal systems, but also to some extent from rice systems. And the third is the nitrous oxide gases, which are very powerful greenhouse gases and are emitted often when fertilizer is used in agriculture.
Like half of all of the habitable land on Earth is taken up by agriculture. So agriculture is very resource intensive, uses a lot of fresh water, which is very scarce. And so it's driving biodiversity loss and all of this sort of stuff. One thing that people don't think so much about is air quality, but maybe they should think about this because it affects human health greatly. And in fact, it's the largest environmental risk factor for death and disease worldwide. And some of those emissions are from agriculture.
There's lots of companies working to reduce the impact of climate change while still providing us with all the food that we need. Companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible are looking at plant-based alternatives to meat production. And then we have companies like Indigo Agriculture and Pivot Bio. They're using microbes in crop production to reduce the need for pesticides and fertilizers. And then there's San Francisco-based Living Carbon, which is producing genetically engineered trees that not only take up more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but results in a longer-lasting, more durable lumber.
I grew up in Washington State, a very large forestry state, and my grandmother was an amateur botanist, and my uncle was also really involved as a logger, and so I just grew up with an appreciation of nature. I think what I really am passionate about is unifying teams around really ambitious visions. And if we really want to slow climate change, we have to not only be working on the fundamental R&D, but be commercializing it in the process. So Living Carbon was started by myself and my co-founder, Patrick Miller, and we're a climate change biotech company that leverages the inherent power of plants to capture and store more carbon per acre. We use advanced biotech in our lab to not only identify which genes are of interest to us, but also to incorporate those genes and those traits into our plants. And so we're able to do that by taking basically the plant version of stem cells, callus cells, and from a very early stage incorporates our traits of interest into those plants. We do it in a way that's all plant-based, and from there we then analyze the trees that regenerate. We identify the trees that are the most of interest to us. It looks like they've been the most successful. And then we move on to pilot projects where we plant them outside and we see how they perform. We have many different plants that we've worked with. Some of these are photosynthesis enhanced and others are decomposition resistant, or at least that's the hope. So this is the second stage that they're in, and then eventually they end up being acclimated to soil. In order to keep our forests forests, we have to have these sustainable working forests. People have to be able to make money from their land through a combination of forestry and carbon credits. Otherwise, that land will have to be sold for urban development over time. So if you can get a tree that captures more carbon, but also has more volume per acre, then over time, landowners are actually able to harvest those trees for sustainable wood products, get more revenue per acre, but also have captured more carbon. And that's really what makes us unique. Well, we have all of this biotechnology that we've used to improve our yield in food crops. And all of this technology that's also allowed us to extract a lot of our resources from our planet. Can we use that in a way that allows for humans to really reintegrate ourselves into our biosphere? That isn't just human technology used for human benefit, but advanced biotechnology used to not only benefit humans because we're capturing carbon, but also to benefit our planet, to improve photosynthesis efficiency and the amount of carbon that we capture.
So loads of people are excited about things like reforestation and agroforestry and soil carbon management, which might have the potential to improve some things.
I think there is certainly potential for an increased role of trees in the agricultural system. Agriculture could be a sink for carbon going forward, and that's a lot of the interest around its role in climate change is not just because it's a current source, but because it has some potential sinks.
When I think about the impact that we have, I personally don't believe that there's a future world that allows for us to just let our ecosystem crumble, let runaway climate change happen. But if we don't address the climate crisis, then whatever sort of iteration of human civilization comes after, they won't have the millions of years of resources that we had. So I think from a civilization perspective, this is really I would say, our one shot.
In the 20th century, advances in machines and chemistry helped us grow the food we needed to feed a hungry world. And in the 21st century, advances in biology will help us find solutions to climate change that are literally growing on trees.
No matter how I do it, and no matter what population I'm doing it for, I've just always known that my purpose is to feed people. I'm Laura Katz. I'm the founder and CEO of Helena. I'm 29 years old and I'm a food scientist. At Helena, we're recreating all of breast milk's most valuable components, starting with the proteins found in breast milk, with the goal of bringing parity in health outcomes for formula-fed infants with our product. So we're helping bring immunity to formula using the protein technology that we have. I have been working in food since I was 10. So when I was really, really little, I started catering and just bringing as much food to people as possible. And throughout my career, I've worked all throughout food, but really working as a food scientist over the past 5-6 years to develop all kinds of different food products. And so for me, being able to bridge that gap between women's health and food science was such an important opportunity. I teach food science at NYU. I've been teaching there. I started when I was 24. A lot of the students I've taught have been older than me, and so it's been a process of figuring it out, but I knew that, I had the ability to take that energy and be able to kind of insert it into how we can use it to advance women's health and infant nutrition. We're building a global brand, and so I want to change what nutrition looks like, not just for infants, but for all different kinds of population, and just change how people think about what they eat that is something more functional and provides immunity to them.
Judy Faulkner is one of the most successful self-made women that you've probably never heard of. Her company is called Epic Systems, and it is based in Verona, Wisconsin.
Epic Systems is a company that does electronic health records, which might not sound all that exciting.
What the company does really is basically the backbone of a hospital. And the way that you would interact with it is, so you call your doctor, you go online and you make an appointment. That appointment scheduling is through the electronic health record. Then when you actually go visit your doctor and they figure out what's wrong with you, you get a prescription, that also goes in there. There are about 225 million people in the United States with an electronic health record in Epic.
Faulkner has been building Epic since 1979.
I didn't intend at all to have this career. I happened to write the original software, and everybody asked me to start a company, and I kept saying no until I finally said yes.
She created this system, and it was basically just a really fast and easy way to create a schedule that otherwise would have taken an extremely long time and a lot of people to do it. She started building a database and this was really, really innovative at the time. You could actually track a patient's record over time, from when, the first time that they went to see the doctor to the next time that they went to see the doctor. As the company grew, it added things like billing. It got a nicer user interface. And it was being used at outpatient clinics and then inpatient hospitals. Around 2009, the government started to get involved by really encouraging hospitals to adopt these electronic health records. Then there was legislation passed, and hospitals all of a sudden had a reason and they had funding to really increase adoption. And Epic, it was reliable. Today, around 2,400 hospitals worldwide are using Epic.
Since Epic's founding in 1979, Faulkner has rejected outside investors, Wall Street financing, and acquisitions.
But that's also where Epic gets criticized, because people say that kind of build it alone mentality means that it's difficult to share data.
During the pandemic, Epic Systems stepped up to help.
Judy and Epic made a decision that they wouldn't charge their customers for COVID-19 related software. So this was like infection control software for all these pop-up hospitals that were starting to be built, many other pop-up hospitals like at the Javits Center. And still, they're no longer charging customers for those that kind of software. And Judy said there was like $500 million in foregone revenue that they didn't take in because they gave away all that stuff for free.
Forbes estimates Faulkner's 47% stake in Epic to be worth $6 billion, which makes her the second richest self-made woman in America.
Perseverance, speaking out, and speaking your mind and taking a stance on things and not, I like the saying, what you put up with is what you stand for, and that's a high bar.
She has built this empire, or tiny empire, I would say, in Verona, Wisconsin. So Epic has around 10,800 employees, and the entire company revolves around this campus, which has, I mean, it's hard to describe. People have compared it to an adult Disney World, but there are just crazy buildings and all of these different themes like Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz and Harry Potter. There's a great hall.
People who know Judy all have the same thing to say.
And the first thing that everyone says, regardless of whether they like Judy or they're a critic of Judy, is that she's brilliant. That was the word I heard over and over again. She originally coded everything herself. She had, you know, a real understanding of the fundamentals and what the company was building. And that is part of the success of Epic as it's grown, is that they build all of the software in-house. The thing about healthcare is it is so slow moving. And so Epic and everybody else, they have time to figure out what's next. But it definitely is an exciting moment for the industry. Judy doesn't talk publicly that much. She has this like very mythical status. Like if you're in healthcare circles and you say the name Judy, everyone knows who you're talking about. You don't have to say Judy Faulkner. I asked Judy what it's like to be one of the few women leaders in software. And her answer was that she just doesn't think about it that much. She's just a person doing work. And that's how she approaches it. She told me that as long as she's effective and bringing value to the company, that she will keep being the CEO. And so I think she's just going to keep working.
Consumer spending habits are totally different today than they were before COVID. People are using credit cards less and paying off their credit card debts.
A lot of people don't like the idea of revolving credit card debt, and they know that they pay a lot in interest on the revolving debt, but a lot of times that's something that they can't help. People aren't spending as much because you can't go out of your house as much. People are taking advantage of that opportunity to kind of take some debt off their own personal balance sheet.
While millennials are shunning consumer debt and spending more online, companies that offer buy now, pay later options are growing in popularity. If you've ever tried to purchase something online, during checkout there may be an option to pay in installments, so you don't have to pay for everything up front. That's what Affirm does.
When you want to buy something new and you don't want to add it to your revolving credit card debt, essentially through Affirm, you can see what you're going to pay in interest upfront. So it might say, all right, for this new watch, you're going to pay $200 and you're going to pay it off in 6 weeks. And you're going to pay, whatever amount of money every 2 weeks to pay it off. That is different from when you have revolving credit card debt. There is compounding interest. If you have the same $200 expense and you only pay $20 a month or $50 a month, you are still paying interest on the balance, the rest of it that you haven't paid off. So the interest compounds and you end up paying more in interest.
Affirm is valued at about $26 billion, and they expect to make over $760 million in revenue in 2021. They make money from consumers in the form of interest rates.
Max Levchin is the co-founder and CEO of Affirm, and the people I talk to would describe him as really all business. He's very competitive. He's a serious guy. So I think roughly half of the time it's charging interest to consumers, and that ranges from 0 to 30%. On average, from one set of loans that it has issued, I think the average interest rate was about 24%.
And they make money from merchant fees too.
So merchants pay every time a customer buys one of their products and uses Affirm. And the reason they pay, the argument Affirm makes is that people buy more when you have Affirm, when you can use Affirm. These retailers see higher order sizes, they see more orders when they enable something like Affirm, and they decide, okay, it's worth it to pay this, 4 or 5, 6% fee, so that I get more volume, I get more sales.
According to consulting firm Oliver Wyman, Americans spent over $20 billion using buy now, pay later programs in 2020.
Two of the probably most notable competitors are Afterpay, which is based in Australia but has a big US presence, and Klarna, which is based in Sweden but also has a big US presence. And so their fees are a little lower. On average, I believe Afterpay is 4 to 5%, Klarna, I believe 3 to 4%, and Affirm roughly 6%. I asked them this recently, why will people pay these higher fees? And what Affirm will say is that, we're delivering a better experience. It's easy to use Affirm. We don't have late fees. Some merchants like that. Afterpay and Klarna do have late. If you don't pay on time, there are late fees. And so I think those are some of the reasons that a merchant will choose Affirm over Klarna or Afterpay. But Affirm isn't a bank. They don't have a base of deposits they can go off of. So they need to fund their loans by basically packaging them into a security, and then the securities get sold to other investors. They're good at this capital markets aspect of funding the loan, getting funding for the loans and selling them at a reasonable cost to Affirm, because Affirm has to pay to do this. It's not that easy to fund these really big $2,000 loans. And so that is another, I think, competitive advantage that they say they have is being able to fund these bigger loans.
People processed $2.1 billion in transactions through Affirm in the last quarter of 2020. Like Affirm, these programs are popular with consumers because they see what they're paying for upfront, instead of being hit with credit card interest rates later.
It helps with budgeting. There's kind of an end date. You need to pay this off in 2 months, and so it gives you, I think it gives more financial discipline. You can't just kind of keep kicking the can down the road and say, all right, I'm only going to put $20 towards this month, or $30, pay the minimum on my credit card. I think it really causes you to have more financial discipline, and I think people like that too. I think that they're going to expand into different financial services, but I don't think it'll be like 2020 where it grew like crazy. I mean, I think it was a unique year. I think that you had the stimulus, you had a lot of economic uncertainty where people were afraid to use their credit cards. I think, you're going to see people eventually moving back to credit cards a little bit more. That would be my guess, as there's less financial uncertainty. And so I don't think it will grow as much as it did in 2020, but I think they'll keep growing.
I've been starting businesses since I was 10 years old, and I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so I think the failures is really what led me to being able to start this company and have the success that we've had. My name is John Walsh. I'm the founder and CEO of Indera, and we build electric vehicles. We, at our core, focus on innovating technologies to make electric vehicles cheaper, better than gas vehicles. Since I was young, since I was 6 years old, I was always concerned about the environment, and I also was really passionate about business. I watched the movie The Inconvenient Truth in grade school, and it freaked me out, just seeing how many carbon emissions we're emitting and potentially creating an unlivable planet. And so trying to come up with a way, an economically viable approach to a clean energy was really what I found was necessary. I started my first clean tech company when I was 18 in high school. And then I started a water company that also had some, environmental and renewable energy kind of spin to it. And I really realized that, if you want to create a scalable company and if you want to have true impact, you have to make it cheaper and cleaner. And Dara's mission is to end the era of fossil fuels. Finding a way to do it where you're going to have mass adoption has been our core focus. And so making it cheaper, making it better, making it easier, that's what we're here to do. I'm just getting started. And it's been 3 really amazing years of growth, and we want to have thousands of electric vehicles on the road, thousands of employees, because that is truly how we're going to make an impact on our planet and reducing carbon emissions and making a greener world for everybody. So, we're going to be a multi-billion-dollar company, and we're going to save the planet while doing it.
In the 1967 movie The Graduate, the titular character is told that the future can be expressed in just one word: plastics. And that movie wasn't wrong. Advances in chemical manufacturing in the 20th century were able to turn crude oil into products like detergents, industrial chemicals, and yes, plastics. This new type of chemistry drove billions of dollars in economic growth, and it made people's lives infinitely easier. But it didn't come without a cost. Chemical manufacturing is a dirty process that emits fossil fuels, creates its own pollution, and accidents at chemical plants can cause fires and even explosions near city areas. But here in the 21st century, there are companies looking to manufacture chemicals that farmers, manufacturers, and consumers use every day without the dirty process of cracking fossil fuels. These range from genetically modifying microbes to create the chemicals that we need, to even literally creating fertilizer out of thin air. All without the dirty, costly processes that defined chemical manufacturing in the 20th century. To better understand how chemical manufacturing impacts climate change, we talked to 2 academic experts who've been researching how chemical manufacturing affects the environment and how to make them greener.
The chemical industry is incredibly broad, and in many ways it can kind of be broken down into 2 major components. The first would be some of the large-scale chemicals that we use. In our industry, we call it commodity chemicals. The other are specialty chemicals.
So most industrial chemicals are part of a petroleum-based supply chain, and we've devised this supply chain and processing paradigm that involves temperature and pressure. So we apply high temperatures or we apply pressure to materials, and that allows them to interconvert and make other chemicals or materials that we need to use. But we know that there are sustainability challenges here. This sort of processing method leads to huge greenhouse gas emissions.
One of the big impacts is energy. A lot of these processes take an awful lot of energy. They're done at high pressure and or high temperature. One of the big negative impacts is all the energy required to make the chemicals generates a lot of carbon dioxide.
What are the prospects for using yeast, bacteria, and other microorganisms to manufacture chemicals?
Yeah, I think nature has this incredible ability to conduct chemical transformations in a really selective manner. And I think learning to harness that capability in an energy efficient manner remains one of the frontiers. And I think we've seen an appreciable amount of progress in terms of being able to take nature's machinery and use it for things that humans desire in a more energy efficient manner.
There are lots of companies and entrepreneurs who are taking the old-fashioned methods of chemical manufacturing and turning them into something that's more efficient, more sustainable, and costs less money. For example, Omaha-based Monolith Materials is taking the greenhouse gas methane and turning it into fertilizer for farms. And today we're going to be talking to Houston-based Solugen, which is taking the waste from corn harvesting and turning it into greener industrial chemicals.
At Solugen, we're using the power of synthetic biology to make low-cost, high-performance, and carbon-negative specialty chemicals. The entire purpose of the chemicals industry is to purchase a low-cost feedstock and convert it into a high-value product as efficiently as possible.
The way we produce our products without the same level of CO2 emissions as the incumbents is by completely reimagining how we think about chemical manufacturing. And the way we do that is we take the best of two worlds. Today, chemistry is made with either petrochemistry or through fermentation. What we've done at Solugen is said, well, we don't want to demonize petrochemistry because it's worked. It's worked for many years. So perhaps there's a way we can marry the two to create something that's better than each.
We take the enzymes from the cells and we take the metal catalyst from thermochemistry and we combine them together in a new way. And for the first time, we can convert feedstock directly into product. So today, we're using corn syrup as our feedstock. In addition to corn syrup, our enzymes and metal catalysts can also convert other sugars, alcohols, as well as vegetable oils into specialty chemicals.
The idea for Solugen actually was born out of our PhD work from me and Sean. One night over a poker game, we started talking and realized that there might be a world where we marry my love for enzymes and biology with his love for process design and metal catalysis to make a more efficient process. Some of the products that we're making for our customers right now are a suite of water treatment chemicals. So these are chemicals that kill bacteria, prevent corrosion of water pipes and tanks, and it prevent hard water from forming in our water supplies.
So after we got the initial $10,000 grant from MIT, we only had $10,000, so the question was, well, we have some customers who are interested in buying our first product. What can we do with this money to deliver on that? So this is a $7,000 essentially PVC bubble column, but with this we were able to make a mixture of hydrogen peroxide and organic acids, but we'd make little 5-gallon buckets and then I'd put them in my Subaru and drive around Dallas. And those were our first 3 customers were float spas in the Dallas area.
Every aspect of our process technology has been looked at from the lens of sustainability and carbon negativity. It's all 100% wind power here. Today, evaporation is done using natural gas. Pretty intense process, but what we've been able to do is use natural gas and actually use one of the world's most energy efficient evaporation technologies that actually allows us to be carbon negative. As a physician, my focus is to do no harm, and now the biggest harm that's happening is what's happening to the environment. And so as a physician, it felt like the only way that I can actually help humanity was to focus on this massive problem. And so that's really what excited us to keep going.
Yeah, what they're doing at Solugen is at the very frontier of making use of an enzymatic toolkit to be able to then produce a commodity chemical in a way that seems very techno-economically and sustainability-wise attractive. And that is, in many cases, felt as though it's out of reach. I think many will be paying a lot of attention to the approach that Solugen is taking and thinking about how to apply that to an even wider range of chemicals.
In the 1960s, the future may have looked like plastics. But in the 2020s, we're taking the biological power of life itself to power a greener and more sustainable way to manufacture the chemicals we need.
Being under 30 and building a biotech company is not sexy. It's a kind of faux pas, honestly. And it's just been very fun learning how to modernize an old industry. I'm Celine Hollywell. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Loyal. We develop drugs to extend dog lifespan, and I am 27 years old. So I grew up in Austin, Texas. We had 15 cats, like 2 or 3 dogs. We used to rescue animals. There's a picture of me with a little baby squirrel on my shoulder, which it's really cute, but looking at it now, it's like that was a total rabies risk. So I'm definitely a huge animal person. But actually the reason why I started the company was the summer before I got into college for art school. I decided to do an internship at a neuro-oncology clinic. And I basically just kind of realized that we don't actually, in my opinion, have free will. I met a number of relatively young brain cancer patients who there was nothing anyone could do for them. So really, like, ever since I was 18, I've been trying to understand what's the best way to work on that problem, right? So I was, pre-med student for a while, then I started a PhD, then I worked at a venture fund investing in biotech companies. I ended up going to dogs first about 2 years ago because I basically realized that there was a huge unmet need, especially in the case of larger dogs, but also that dogs were a really awesome proving ground for potentially getting the first ever drug approved explicitly for aging, and then translating what we learned from dogs over to people. I struggled for a while because I'd walk into a room and people wouldn't assume that I'm competent. I don't know if it has to do as much as me being under 30 as me being a woman. I think that's really been a big variable in that. So you have to believe that you can build a dog aging drug, that it's $1 billion market, that this is the best way to get to human aging drugs, that there's an aging drug for human markets, and that I can do it. I'm competent, my team's competent, and we can execute. We're questioning the variables that have been set for a long time, and that's allowed me to build this really amazing team around this really cool idea in a period of time that has been quite rapid.
In 2002, eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion, an acquisition that made PayPal's 20-something co-founders very, very wealthy young men. These included people like Peter Thiel, Max Levchin, and Elon Musk. That group and other early investors in PayPal would go on to become known as the PayPal Mafia, using their proceeds from the sale to fund a range of startups and businesses that have become very successful and household names. Out of this group, Elon Musk has been by far the most successful with his creation of SpaceX and electric vehicle company Tesla. So much so that Tesla has now created a mafia of its own, a group of new companies that are emerging in the electric vehicle, battery, and autonomous vehicle space, who could be dubbed the Tesla Mafia.
Tesla had built a reputation that it didn't constrain its actions by what had been done before. And this was tremendously exciting, enticing, and empowering to an engineer to join a company that is both highly mission-driven, but also espouses the notion that there will be fundamental engineering happening that need not be kind of constrained by past ways of doing things.
Tesla reached out to me. It wasn't a job that you apply for. Tesla was attempting to do this project called Model S, and it was led by a gentleman called Elon Musk. And Elon was looking for a new chief engineer. I visited the prototype shop at Tesla, where the very first concept of Model S was being constructed. And it was really a Mercedes platform with the roof cut off and a fiberglass top representing what Model S would look like, broadly glooped on. It's death trap on wheels. And I took one look at it and I thought, oh goodness me, this is where they're at. And I was intrigued. Clearly Elon had the provenance, and clearly he had the ambition. And you know, sometimes you think this is a great opportunity in life. This is my chance that I've been waiting for all these years to show what I can really do.
We see 5 particularly interesting individuals who look to be members of this new Tesla Mafia. They include Sterling Anderson, who oversaw development of Tesla's autopilot semi-autonomous drive system when he was at the company. After he left, he went on to co-found Aurora Innovation, which has become a leading developer of self-driving vehicle tech.
Tesla is very good at aligning people around a mission, about setting outrageous goals, about establishing a workplace and an environment where expectations are extraordinarily high, but also constraints are extraordinarily low, which is to say, solve the problem by whatever means you can come up with, despite the fact that it may never have been done before. These were kind of foundational principles that allowed a fertile environment for top flight engineers to do great work. And it's something that myself and other peers who have since left to do their own thing continue to espouse many similar things. In many ways, Tesla is very similar to Aurora on some of these dimensions, right? Strong kind of mission-driven organization, highly talented people, an organization willing to set outrageous goals and aggressively pursue them. And, you know, setting a high bar for employees, not only in terms of kind of their skill, but also in terms of kind of the way they work.
Additionally, there's also Gene Berdichevsky, who was the chief engineer for the battery system for the Roadster, the very first Tesla vehicle that launched in 2008.
we believed in the mission as it stands today. We would get critiqued as, oh, it's just sports cars for rich people, but that was from day one, that wasn't the plan. The goal was always this mass market car, not even the Model 3, but sort of that next car that's coming that's going to be even lower cost. And the plan was there from day one. So we knew the importance that the Roadster played to what we've seen unfold over the last 15 years and what's going to unfold over the next 20. And there were absolutely moments where we didn't think we were going to make it on regular occasions, but I think you built a lot of camaraderie and it was incredibly thrilling. I would drive the only prototype in existence home on the weekends for testing, and it was also really fun to share that and kind of show your friends what the future was going to look like.
Gene has co-founded and leads Sila Nanotechnologies, which is developing advanced materials to make lithium-ion batteries cheaper and more energy dense.
We're competing to make the best battery in the world. We're going to be commercially launching in consumer devices this year. So our technology is ready today. It's not waiting another 5 years to see if it's ready. But at the end of the day, we're also all competing against combustion cars and ending the age of ICE vehicles. So I think we're more allies than we are competitors, but the technology paths we're pursuing are a bit different.
There's also Peter Rawlinson, who was chief engineer for the Tesla Model S. Peter these days is CEO and CTO of Lucid Motors, which is about to launch the Lucid Air, arguably the most advanced electric car ever brought out, and that may even be more compelling in many ways than Tesla's best products.
I hope it's a product that people will really fall in love with, because it is in itself a true labor of love. It's taken many years from a brilliant and dedicated team to create this. Because just like Model S, no one person designs a car. It's too complex. A team designed Model S and a team has designed Lucid Air. A passionate team who are all working to make something really next level. And it has to be. We're up against Mercedes-Benz, damn it. How can we compete? There's only one way. Product is king. Product defines brand.
Tesla's been very effective at creating a whole range of entrepreneurs because the company required a lot of ingenuity and creativity to solve difficult problems to get products out the door as quickly as possible. And that ingenuity turns out to be a common thread among members of the Tesla Mafia. All the companies look to be very well positioned to be significant players and potentially even Tesla competitors in the evolving world of electric vehicles, advanced batteries, and autonomous vehicles.